Wow. uh, how many? Over 50 years ago, I dropped out of high school at West Valley High School here here in Spokane, not very far from here. My mother used to attend the St. John Vianney Church, and I went to St. Pascal's when I was young. And to come back after, all the events in your life, to come back and be so warmly welcomed by Spokane. All of you good people, thank you for reading my book. I know it's not an easy read. When when I was in Montana and it was up for the Montana Book Award, Perma Red was up for the Montana Book Award, one of the judges came up to me and said, I'm the reason why you didn't win the award and why you only got the honor book award. And I was like, oh. And she said, because I just thought there was just too much going on in Perma Red. Too many bad things had happened in this book. And I just couldn't believe that many bad things could happen to a person in a year. And she said, and then my brother-in-law set me straight, he worked for the tribe, and he said, oh, this is about 2 weeks worth on the Flathead. But I never forgot that. I never forgot that. When I was in, when I went to another award that was the Mountains and Plains Bookseller Association Award, which my colleague and former student Judy Blunt also won for nonfiction, I had another judge come up to me and she said, well, I didn't want you to win. I wanted Red Water to win by Judith Butler. And my mother was standing next to me. I'll never forget I thought my mother was going to tackle her, but but I think now I come home, and after all these years, I mean, Perma Red went out of print shortly after it came into print. It was pulled by Penguin Putnam. They just eliminated Blue Hand Press, and my editor was out of a job. But I think about all those many years that people on my reservation and reservations throughout Montana kept this book alive. They believed it was their story. And so now, thanks to you, thanks to my Spokane home and community, you've kept this book alive. Before I begin reading, I'd really like to thank, of all people, Sharma Shields. I was fortunate enough and honored, and not a very good teacher, really. I had Sharma Shields as my student at the University of Montana, and she was extraordinary, visionary, and one of the funniest writers I've ever come across. And so I'm so privileged to be here, to have a former student and now a friend be part of the spearhead of this whole movement. I'd also like to thank Angela Richardson. I'd like to thank Andrea Sharps, Amanda Donovan, Andrea Swanson at Auntie's Bookstore. Auntie's Bookstore is a treasure. What a beautiful bookstore. Yes, Brian Vanderveen, who introduced me, and Corinne Wilson. All of the wonderful people here. We do recognize that libraries have been under assault. There have been things that have pulled from the libraries, things that people don't like. I think I had one person flag the Lost Journals of Sacagawea at one book, and at one library. And I think the librarians are such brilliant people and such warm-hearted and generous people who only want to make books available for you so that you can learn, so that you can grow, and so that hopefully you can gain some understanding about the complexities of the world that we face. And it's up to you to choose what books you want to read, what books your children read. And with the help of all of these brilliant and wonderful, warm-hearted and generous souls who are the librarians of our state. I'm grateful. Thank you. I'd like to imagine, I'd like for you to imagine, you're 15 years old, and one day, your teacher takes you to meet the great Maxine Kumin, the poet who has just won the Pulitzer Prize at Eastern Washington University. It was a time when Maxine Kumin was good friends with the poet Anne Sexton, and I had read Anne Sexton. Okay. Is that good? Thank you. And I had read Anne Sexton when I was that 15-year-old, but I didn't really know how to read poetry. And the great late Marianne Waters, who was a poet from Spokane, taught me how to read and took me to meet this poet. And I think about when I was a child in parochial school, when I was at St. Pascal's, and all of if you got early to the church, and I would meet my best friend, and we'd walk to the church, and then if we'd go to church, we liked going to church, actually. But if there was a funeral, we'd hide in the bushes. And so the nuns, particularly Sister Victor Mary, used to come and scout around to see if anyone, I don't know, she was uncanny. And she would pull us from those bushes and make us go to funerals of people we didn't know. And so I think about those days and how all of those days influenced my writing. So everything that I write from here on out is really from my home roots. When I write about the Flathead River, that I take it from my own experience on the Spokane River, where I used to walk the trail with my mother, and how that beautiful river will glitter and call to you. And I know so many of you as readers are also writers, and there was a time when I was told that writing was, and I think I spread this rumor myself, that writing was really hard when I was a professor. Like, writing is so hard. Have you heard this? You know, it's like, I have a student, Stephanie Land, who wrote Maid in class. She recently bought a pillow that said, "Writing is hard." And I was like, do you really want to put that pillow on your couch? And I realized that there are many, men who are telling us, like, just sit down in front of your desk and wait for the blood to form on your forehead before you write. Like, that's how hard it is. But I'm on the other side of academia now, and maybe writing when you're an academic is hard, but writing when you're retired, or writing when you have time. So few of us have time. But when you have the time to write, it's the most wonderful and easy thing in the world. And so any of you, if you're still thinking about writing that memoir, if you're still thinking about writing that book, I urge you to write it. And I urge you to get that notion that it's hard out of your head. Get yourself a nice cup of coffee, a cup of tea, or maybe some brandy, and sit down and write, because it's a fun thing to do. Now I'm going to read something that probably won't sound so fun to you. All of the stories that I tell in Perma Red, most of the stories are based on, I was the first public defender in the tribal court system on the Flathead justice system. So I was 18 years old. I dropped out of high school at 15. And I was hired over people who had degrees, because I was so fiercely wanted to go home and protect and do everything that I could for my tribe and for my people. So I worked with the tribal police officers, because we didn't have a prosecutors at the time. So I went up and defended my clients against the police officers. And so Charlie Kicking Woman is kind of an amalgamation of those valiant police officers who went out into the field and were the first people to see what was happening on the Flathead. They were the ones who were first on scene of domestic violence. They were the ones who were first on scene when someone drowned. They're also the first on the scene of car accidents in the middle of, the Flathead Reservation is a very large reservation. They were the first ones on the scene to witness someone as they departed this earth. And so, children and very young people in car accidents on the reservation, a lot of death. My mother, and a lot of joy too, but my mother used to tell my brother and I, my family, stories. She was a great storyteller. So many of these stories are true. And one of the first stories that she told was a story of Dirty Swallow, who Dirty Swallow was a medicine woman, but her real name, which is so much better than Dirty Swallow, her real name was Dirty Butterfly. Isn't that a great name, Dirty Butterfly? And Dirty Butterfly was a medicine woman who commanded the rattlesnakes. And so the snakes would move they would trail her like a wedding trail, and they would come up behind her, and you could hear them in the August. My mother said you could hear them in the grass behind her when the weeds got dry. So when the weeds turned white and the rattlesnakes were blind in August, when they slaked their skins, they would strike at anything. And so she said, well, those snakes you could hear them crackling behind her, and she could point to them and have them do her bidding. Her son, Baptiste, fell in love with my Aunt Louise. And my Aunt Louise was 16 years old, and she came to the house, and she told my great-grandma, she said, if your niece doesn't agree to, your granddaughter doesn't agree to marry my son, within 1 week, someone in your family will be bitten by the rattler. Mm. And my grandmother was really feisty, and she was like, get out of here with your bad news. Go away, get out. Because she had her own medicine, but go away. Within that week, my mother and her sisters were walking to the store in Perma. This was about a mile to the store, and they were going, and my mother was chasing her sister and jumped over a barrel pit. And she said she felt like a bee sting. And she said she heard paper rattling. And she said then her leg swelled up to like 3 times its size. They used to issue Native children these stockings. The government issued stockings, and they're really thick. And this was in May, and my mother had the stocking up to her thigh. And she said her legs swelled, and it was ripping the stocking. And she didn't tell my grandmother. She kept walking until she couldn't walk. And my grandmother sent Louise back to get their dog because they were going to kill the dog. And my Aunt Vi was like, you're not going to kill Sparky for my mother. Like she would rather have Sparky than my mother. But all of those, all those many years ago, all of these stories kind of came together in Perma Red. And, my Aunt Louise was such a strong and fierce and beautiful woman. Not the kind of beautiful woman that if you saw her, her image wouldn't strike you as being beautiful. But my mother said it wasn't that. She had that certain something that just everyone was drawn to, like that because she was just tough and she was fearless and she had a great sense of humor. And so, this is a story in Charlie Kicking Woman, and this story did happen. So I try to think back, will myself to see the girl behind the door, but as hard as I try, I cannot see Louise's young face then. The image of Louise that most sticks in my mind was years later. I'd been called in to check out the death of Ernestine Chiefspear, a young girl who had choked to death in a fit, the nuns called it. Ernestine died at the Ursulines. I took my time to check on the matter. I wasn't up for it. I adjusted my hat and pulled out my mileage log. I tried to do anything to avoid the inevitable. I had wanted to sit there for a minute, breathe in the clean April air. I knew Chief Spear's family up near Pistol Creek. I had to drive there too, pull up as a policeman, scattering their other kids to the hills to tell her family she was dead. I was new to the job, thinking the nuns should have had the chore of breaking the news to the family, not me. But I had to be the one to tell Ray Chief Spear his daughter was dead. I had to punch that family with the news that their 13-year-old girl had died. As I was driving up their road, I knew I had to hide my own imaginings from them. They could see their daughter in my eyes, their sister dying in a dark room with floors so polished they gleamed like water. I couldn't stop myself from seeing Ernestine choking to death in a night-black room while the nuns were probably singing or praying by candlelight. When I told the Chief Spear family I was sorry, I realized I wasn't sorry like I should have been. I wasn't sorry I drove a big official car because even the reservation problems began to look good from behind a windshield. I wasn't sorry I had more food to eat these days than I ever had. I would never be so hungry I would choke on the food I was eating, as I suspected their daughter had. I wasn't sorry the whites treated me better when I put on the badge, and that sometimes I thought I was better too. The worst part is, deep down, I knew even then I wasn't any better than any other Indians with a job. Going to the Ursulines just reminded me of my own failures, because after only a few minutes of this sister's company, I found myself blaming Ernestine Chief Spear for her own death. I had listened to the nuns, and what they told me was Ernestine Chief Spear was bad, and because she was bad, she had died. They didn't say that to me with their words. They told me everything with their sternly crossed arms, the sagging twists of their mouths. It was Ernestine's own fault she had been locked up, the brutal hint being she got what she deserved. And I stood there, dumb to the nuns. I stood there with a pencil and a hardback report, and I couldn't make sense of any of it. It just seemed to me the more the white man tried to do for us, the more trouble we had. The government thought it was a good thing for the Indians to attend the white man's school, to be instructed by a group of women who had never known love. Women who were more lost than we were as a troop of wild-eyed Indians, homesick, lousy, smelling like wood smoke. Women who came from France, women who came from Germany, women who were more like us Indians than they cared to admit, women who had lost their identities too. Even their names, like our names, were lost to them. Nuns, sisters who were not sisters, their hands so white there was a gray look about them. And I used to think they hated us. I'd been struck by these women, had my ears slapped for laughing, had been cuffed so hard I bit through my lower lip, but I felt sorry for these women and their lonesome lives. I used to walk up behind the school and look at the graveyards of all these women buried far from their families, knowing that long after we had left the Ursulines, they would stay. I've got a lot of problems to deal with here, more than I liked. I had to accept the nuns at their word. Their uniform would always be more commanding than the one I wore. Their story ached in my ears because I was telling myself the same story, because somehow the blame rested with me because I was Indian too. And Ernestine Chief Spear died, I thought, because she was Indian. She died because she was Indian. And Indians are stupid. 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 The whole while I tended the Ursulines, the nuns told me how stupid Indians were, again and again, so many times that I began to believe we were stupid. The idea sank to my heart, and I would go home and sulk at the hard life I couldn't escape, knowing my grandparents must be stupid too, because they were so proud to speak a language that couldn't be written, illiterate. To the nuns, we were all hopelessly stupid, unteachable, lost. I'm not even sure why I chose to believe what the nuns told me when I was growing up, or why sometimes their words still sting. Even Baptiste Yellowknife refused to believe most of what they said. The nuns couldn't get to him like they got to me. When Yellowknife draws a sober breath, he still says the old ways of our people are the best. The right path is simple, and the right path is still living in the ways of our people. I can't stand his righteousness. I'm seeing too many of our people stumbling toward an early grave, and he's one of them. I'm too many Indians who may be as stupid as the nuns gave them credit for. If the old ways are the best is losing, and I want to win. When did you last check on Ernestine? I asked. Sister Simon told me Chief Spear had only been checked once that morning when her door was unlocked for breakfast. We locked them in, she said, because Louise White Elk and Ernestine Chief Spear were climbing out on the fire escape or sneaking down to the boys' corridor to smoke. She squinted at me, suggesting something more. She handed me a key from her deep black pocket and nodded her head toward the door at the end of the hall. When I opened the door, Louise bolted. I saw her run past Sister Simon. She was barefoot, and my first instinct was to chase her. She ran so fast she was gone before I knew it. I stood for a while, watching the empty stairwell. I'm not sure what I was thinking at first, not thinking at all, I guess. Though I remember I could not shake the image of Louise running from that room. I had expected only to see a dead girl. It never occurred to me that the nuns would lock Louise back up in the room with Ernestine after they had found Ernestine dead. I removed my hat to enter the room. Thank you. I would be so happy to entertain any questions you have entertained. It's like I might do a little dance up here or something, but I'd be so pleased to answer any questions you might have. All right.
I'm curious as to what you can tell us about Camas. If I say it incorrectly, please correct.
Of which?
Camas, the prairie.
Oh, Camas Prairie.
I've heard that it's a place where festivals occur and the food is taken from bulb, and then in your book you mentioned people being buried there.
Oh yeah. Camas Prairie is like if you've ever been to the Flathead Reservation, you've driven like Highway 35, and it's kind of out in the middle, just before Hot Springs, Montana. A lot of people go to Hot Springs, but Camas is out, like it's supposed to be the coldest place on the reservation in the winter. But during the Allotment Act of 1887, we were not given. We were allotted. Some people were allotted 360 acres or 180 acres, and they were supposed to be farmers, or they're suddenly supposed to be cattlemen. Mm-hmm. But if you've never been a farmer or a cattleman, that isn't your way of life, then to be expected to do that. So many people began to starve on their pieces of property. So they sold their property for a month's groceries, or less than that sometimes, just to feed their family. Some of the best parts, like if you go on the Flathead Reservation, you'll see that the prime land, most of it, and the tribe is buying back most of the land, but you'll see that the prime land, like the beautiful spots along the Flathead Lake, along the river, are owned by non-native Indians, and it was never supposed to be opened up. Or non-natives. It was never supposed to be opened up. The reservation was opened up on a rider that Senator Dixon got in 1910, I believe. He wanted to open up the reservation to non-native settlement. So Camas Prairie is a sad sort of statement about that whole sale, because imagine selling a piece of property that your family is buried on. And it's an old cemetery. So these farmers out there in Camas Prairie, and I'll give them credit, they allow us to cross their fields and go out to, Louise, my Aunt Louise is buried there too, and as many of my family. And so they have a fence around it, but the cattle break through the fences, and they don't really chase those cattle out. So when you go to, they still have burials out there, but those old allotments were, lost years ago. But I think the tribe is trying to get back, some of those properties and to protect some of those old burial sites, those old really historic cemeteries.
Anyone else has a question? I'm happy to bring you the microphone.
I can talk really loud. Hi.
Hi.
First of all, I have to say thank you for reading. I could listen to you all day long.
Thank you.
And I'm a Grizz.
Yay!
So that's right. So I love that whole area. Where did the title come from?
One of my good friends I was trying to figure out, what do I name this? I had a short story that I wrote, and I said, what do I name this? And she goes, why don't you name it Perma Red? That was a nickname that my Aunt Louise had. And she had the name Perma Red because there's a root, I guess, that grows by the Flathead River. And if you dig up that root and you pound it, you can put it in your hair. It's works as a really beautiful burnished red dye. So your hair so Louise put that in her hair. And so she had this gorgeous sort of really dark skin and then this beautiful red hair. So they called her Perma Red because her hair was red. They called her Perma Red because she was really native. And they called her Perma Red because she had a red light district reputation. And the older that I get, the more that I appreciate my Aunt Louise's red light district reputation. Because somebody just gave me a photograph of her, and she's with these two men, and she died in that car accident in 1947, but she was with these two men, and they're drinking their bottles of beer, and she does this vulgar gesture where she has a bottle of beer here, and then she pretends that the other bottle of beer is an appendage. But she was just fearless. I mean, during that time, one of the things I didn't even realize this until I got the Bureau of Indian Affairs, probably about 25 years ago, released the records of Native people. So all the records that they kept all the records that they kept on Native people, they made copies and they gave it back to the people who had written them. In one of the letters, I found that Louise was 20 pounds underweight, they said, so they were going to send her to a tuberculosis clinic. And another one, she outsmarted the tribal police officers because they threw her in jail. She was 15, and they threw her in jail because she was a truant. They threw her in the Missoula County Jail, the women's jail. And so they're transporting her back to take her back to Mission, the boarding school there, and she goes, I've got to go to the bathroom. And so they didn't think it was November, it had snowed, it was cold, she was barefoot. And so they let her out, and they thought, well, she's not going to do anything. And she just bolted, and she ran over the hills, and she ran barefoot. And they couldn't even track her, though her feet were bleeding, and she went, back to grandma's. So my brother and I have this story, and it's sad, but it's kind of funny. I still have the urge. Native people were so harassed by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. When my mother was young, she was sent at the age of 14 to be a housekeeper in somebody else's house in Portland. She was removed from the home and sent away. She wasn't paid, but the man felt so guilty he would give her a bag of coins once a week. And she would go and have a hot fudge sundae and a pronto pup, with her little money. But the Bureau of Indian Affairs used to send the superintendent or the social workers would come out. And my grandmother knew this, so they would knock on the door, and grandma, they would climb through the windows, and they would bolt for the hill, even if it was 10 below. They would go outside and they would stay warm. They'd hide and watch until he left, because oftentimes they'd come to snatch the kids, take them away, send them as far away as they could, or remove them from the home, just because they could. And so my mother whenever somebody would knock on our door, my mother would go, "Get down." And so we get down, and we'd be like, "What are we getting down for?" And my mom, just be quiet. And so we wouldn't answer the door. And my brother just asked me, he goes, do you still have an urge to get down on the floor when somebody, and I thought, yeah, I do. I do have an urge to get down on the floor. And yeah, so I don't know whether that answers your question, but
Thank you.
you know what? Here's something that I think is really interesting too. Is like I never thought the stories. I love my mother's stories. She was such a powerful storyteller, and she would tell stories, and she'd tell the same stories. A good storyteller would tell the same story over again in different ways. So you see it in different dimensions at different times in your life. Your mother will sit and tell your grandfather's, and I never saw those stories as really important, but I just love them. And now, years later, I'm 67 years old now, and I see the power and potency of those stories and how they can change lives. And I used to teach a storytelling class at the University of Montana, and I'd tell my students, you're young, get your family's stories now. Don't neglect it. Go home, when you go home for Thanksgiving, get those stories. Call your grandparents, call your uncles and your aunts, and try to get those stories, because they will go away and you won't remember them and their history, their powerful history. So, yeah. So, sorry, I see another.
First of all, thank you for writing this book. I loved it. I read it right after Killers of Flower Moon. I did a grant, and it just was very timely. It was very eye-opening. But on a lighter note, as I was reading, I noticed that the Charlie kicking woman was a first person. I thought Louise was the main character, and I'm just curious. The rest of the book, I think, might have been in third person, and so
Yeah.
I just was curious, is Charlie kicking woman the main character? Was Louise not? Was that intentional?
Well, originally the novel, that's a good question. Originally the novel was in 7 first-person voices. Louise has a voice only at the end. I saw Louise as a person that we all, there's always that one person we really love. Like in a community, the person who's really kind of the one who's the smartest, the one who's the best athlete, the one who's the most beautiful. And we see that person, and that person usually has a bad end, and it's in all of our communities. So that objectification of that person, how we look at a person and tell stories about that person and remember that person. So there was all this chorus of voices around Louise. And then my editor said, hey, so I had seven first-person voices, and I was such a nut. I had a third-person backup to each first-person voice because I thought it was crazy. And then I had a second-person voice that was cut out when I was at Cornell. One of my professors said, Debra, you got to get rid of this big Indian voice. And it was a second person. It was like, you will come to great waters. You will see many. It was ridiculous. But that was the reason. When I worked with the great editor, Greg Michelson, he said, cut this down to 2. I'll give you 2. Who is going to tell Louisa's story? And so it was Charlie Kicking Woman, who sees things first and who has a deep, kind of a big, I think he loves her, but it's crushing kind of love. It's not a healthy love. And that's who I chose to see her. And then she was supposed to have her voice at the very end. And that's why I couldn't sell the novel, because at the very end, and so if you haven't read the ending of Perma Red, the spoiler alert, my Aunt Louise did die in 1947 at the age of 23 when her car went over an embankment. And so at the very end, and my mother, this is really a hard story, but my mother was 15 years old at the time. And it was a long night of Christmas into morning. And the sheriff didn't want to drive all the way out to Perma. She was staying in Dixon with some family. And so they picked up my mom in Dixon and drove her to St. Ignatius, which is about 20 miles from Dixon. And it was over really icy roads. And So my mother was scared. My mother was a scaredy cat. She's scared of things. She was really scared of this white man, and he told her, "Your sister died tonight, and I want you to identify her body." So he drove my mother to Farron's mortuary there in Mission, that's still there. And he wouldn't wake up the undertaker because it was like 4:30 in the morning. So my mom thought, "Oh, thank God, like I don't have to do this." And so that didn't stop. He stopped the car. He got out and went around all of the windows and the door. He tried the doors first, they were locked. Then he went around the windows and he found a window that was open. He got my mother out of the car. He saddled his hands. And my mother's like, "I don't want to go." And he's like, "You're going in." And it just so happened that was the room that my Aunt Louise was in state in. And so there was a sheet over her face, and my mother said, "As soon as I climbed through the window, I knew it was her. I could feel her, and I just knew it was my sister. I saw her hands." And he said, "Pull back the sheet." And my mother refused. She said, "No, it's my sister." So, I think about those times. And, at the time, like years ago when my mother told me that story, I knew it was hard. I knew it was awful, but I didn't think the ramifications of that story were as huge as they are. That, what happens when you don't respect people, and you don't respect their children, and you traumatize them. So, what happened to my mother and what happened to my Aunt Louise and all of my, family so long ago is really, really sobering, I think, really eye-opening. And it was Perma Red was a hard book to write and a hard book to sell. They didn't want to sell the ending. Like my agent was like fierce in New York, like, "I'm going to sell this." And I didn't have the money to have a phone. So I had to drive into town with my little phone card. Remember those? And I'd like call her, and she said, "Good news. All these editors at the big house are really excited. I think there's going to be a bidding war." And then I'd come back and she goes, "Every single one of them passed because Louise died. The heroine dies." And so I said, "Would it help?" After going through this many times, I said, "Would it help if I resurrected Louise?" And she said, "Yes, but I refuse for you to do that." And I went home and I talked to the writer, William Kittredge. And I said, "Bill, what should I do?" And he goes, "You know what to do." And then so what I did was sit at the end of the bar with Bill for like about 3 weeks, drinking and talking about stuff. And then finally I said, "I don't know how to do a rewrite. This book is monstrous." And he goes, "Yes, you do." He goes, "I'll tell you how to do it." And I love that I'm wearing a chambray shirt. He goes, "You got a chambray shirt?" He goes, "Roll up the shirt sleeve." And I thought he was going to tell me, "Well, you sit down." I thought he had like he had really concrete ideas, but they weren't about the book itself. It was like, "Roll up your shirt sleeves. Take that novel, got a big table, throw that sucker down and start cutting." He goes, "Just do it." He goes, "Just do it." And so I went home. I went back up to the reservation. I went to my cabin and I sat down with that novel. And I started probably around 4:30, and by about 2:30 in the morning, I had cut everything and rewritten and resurrected Louise. And my mother said, "Thank you." When she read it, she said, "I always wondered what it would have been like if Louise would have lived."
Oh.
And so, yeah, so I see somebody here in the audience that was that I was married when I was 17, and I see my former brother-in-law and my former sister-in-law, and I haven't seen them in how many years? 35 years. Tom and Pam, gosh, so great to see you.
Great to see you.
So, any other questions? I'm not sure what time it is. I've rambled on. Yes?
What's next?
Oh, what's next? I'm working on, thank you for asking. I'm working on something that I think is fun, although no, you wouldn't think it was fun because it's a witch. It's a witch novel. But it's set on the in the mission boarding school. So there were people like Dirty Butterfly who were people who performed medicine, like dark medicine. They performed it for their own wishes and desires and good. So I pit those against the Ursuline nuns who were also known as witches and were charged with witchcraft in the 17th century. So I put those two together in the boarding school with a whimsical 11-year-old precocious girl it's a high school integrated boarding school, and she's there with her sister who doesn't want to be there. And havoc ensues that, she discovers things. And it's really a dark story, but it's because this child is innocent and whimsical and smart. It's not such a dark story. So yeah, I've kept you long enough. I think I've kept you. Oh, have I kept you? Oh,
For another 2 minutes, if anybody has another question or two, we do have some time. I'm just curious. I know the book we're here to talk about today is Perma Red, but I also see the Sacagawea book and playing on here. Was that written before or after? And can you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, the Lost Journals of Sacagawea was commissioned by he's a master printer, out of San Francisco. So he's did the original typeset, and together we worked on. I was asked to write a piece on the Lewis and Clark exhibition during the bicentennial. And I sat down, and what came out in like 30 minutes was the Lost Journals of Sacagawea. And you can look it up online. And I struck, the words that are struck I wanted to keep because I was thinking about how someone tries to express something but doesn't have the right words. Like English isn't really that facile. So trying to express it. So you can, I'm not sure whether this library has one. I know the University of Montana bought one. They started out at $3,500 and they went to, now I think they're worth $30,000 a piece for those, but you can look them up online. But the Lost Journals of Sacagawea, which came from that book, I knew I hadn't ended the story. So I felt like I was called. I know that sounds, no, I'm not going to, it sounds a little dingy, but I was called by Sacagawea to write that story. I feel it's so dark and it's so eye-opening, and was such an awakening for me to write a story like that. And I wrote it with a fury. My editor came to visit me. I've never had an editor fly out to see me and say, "When can you get this to me?" And I said, "Do you want it in shattered prose, or do you want it as he goes, "I don't care. However you want to write this, I want it, and we're buying it." So he gave me 6 months to write it, and I wrote it in 7. So yeah. Okay. All right. I think we're almost done. Thank you. Did you hear that? Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I have a short question again.
Okay.
I may be off on this, but have you modeled, should I say, after in the character in the book, great grandmother Magpie? Is that you?
Oh no, that's actually my great grandmother, Cecile Charlotte Vandenberg, whom I'm named after. Oh,
she was real.
yeah.
Your description of her, I thought, looked so much like you.
My description of my great grandmother looks like me. Oh, that's interesting.
Not knowing she was real, I thought you had gone out with yourself.
No, I do appear in the book, but most of this, I started writing Perma Red when I was really young. So most of the, in order to animate a character, I kept coming back to my mother and saying, I had my mother read everything. I tried to stay with the facts of the case. And my mother was like, "It's nice writing, honey, but not Louise." You haven't captured Louise. And so when I gave up the idea and I said, life is sacrosanct, no matter how long you've been with a partner, it can be 50, 60 years, and you'll never know that person really. And so I thought, I'm going to fashion her after my own experiences. So when I did that, I gave it to my mother, and she had tears in her eyes, and she said, "Yeah, you captured Louise. That's her." And so I think it makes me think how we're all connected, how all of our stories cross a line that infuses us with love and compassion for other people. So we all have that same story. So
We've got about 5 more minutes. Anybody else have a question?
This question is not specifically about the book, but it's something that while I was reading the book, I kept asking myself about the names, Indian names.
mhm.
Obviously, there are languages. All different tribes have different languages. And yet when somebody's magpie or their dirty butterfly or dirty squirrel, whatever it might be, that's English. So where do these names come from? Is it a translation of an Indian name?
Yes, yeah. My grandfather's name was Quetzkis, which means magpie cap. So I was named after Cecile, my great grandmother who appears in the book, Cecile Charlot Vanderberg, but she was a magpie, Cecile Magpie. So, and my great grandfather, whom I connect with, is also a medicine person, and his name was like Magpie Cap. So those are all translated names, as you know, like there's so many names like Two Teeth and. Mhm. What? Oops.
This is questions from the side of the room. That's all I
I'll,
find it. We're working on it.
I don't have the.
I'm wondering if in those family stories, of the whole book, the story, the part of it that stays with me most is when Louise runs for help and saves your mother. Was that the beginning of the family story that's started this?
And saves Florence. I mean, sorry. Yeah, that was it. That was well, that was such a compelling story because it was about my mother. So my mother name was Florence, and when I kill her off in the book because I had to compact characters, she called me up crying. So this woman had a question here.
I just one of the characters that I just really I identified with, I guess I could say, was the sheriff, the Charlie kicking woman.
Mm-hmm.
I felt for him. I mean, he was just so torn over this woman, and that's what I kept thinking about. She must have been so beautiful and enchanting, but at the end, he wants to go back to his wife. Yeah. And I think it was just does he go back to his wife? I mean, that's what
The story continues. I see him as going back to his wife, and I actually see as.
I guess I kind of just really wanted the words there that said. Even I think that in one sentence he went back to his wife.
But there's many things in that book, like Himaka's 3 dresses when she is murdered, and when her body is found in the field, and then you know what? The one person who did not ask me who killed her was my editor. He said, it can be a mystery, but when I worked on the reservation, and now I live close to the reservation, 8 miles from my reservation, and we have many, Jermaine Charlo, we have many people who are women who are missing and murdered, and persons who are missing and murdered. And so they never find out who has killed these women, who has killed these men. So I wanted that to be like the mystery. I don't know who killed her. I would say that it isn't Baptiste, though. So I think that's probably. I can talk to you.
You are so good. I mean, you are. I mean, you are just so natural.
Oh,
I mean, I love that.
Thank you.
Because I listened to you on YouTube, and I thought this lady really knows how to communicate.
Oh, that's so nice. Well, storytelling is a thing, Key, right? and all their families. And so, so this year, and especially around Thanksgiving when you gather with your family, I know there's a lot of political upheaval right now, and there's a lot of turmoil in families. Don't talk about politics. Those are immaterial. Talk about the stories of your family that sustain you, the love that you have. Okay, thank you. Thank you.